The first one is, I expect him to see when I'm overwhelmed, and he expects me to know where things are.
Mm-hmm.
Second one, that we have to have a lot of sex to be a healthy couple.
Right.
That's a great expectation to identify. Third, that my partner won't find other women attractive. And then she put in parentheses, which I know is silly. And then fourth, I expect him to put me at the top of his priority list with his work and family. And he expects me to have other hobbies. Again, we could read many more, but I'm sure you can already start to place yourself in different expectations that you have. And it can be all different areas: intimacy, finances, hobbies, just your relationship, your personalities.
Yeah, for sure. We're bringing this up because some people have said, can I have expectations? Mm-hmm. Is that bad? Mm-hmm. And you're going to get in this episode that it's not about good or bad expectations, because you're always going to have them.
Yeah.
If you're a human being, you're going to have expectations. We're going to cover even why that is. So even more so, if you're in a relationship, you're always going to have expectations. So it's not a matter of expectations or not, whether you have a healthy relationship or unhealthy, is what we're going to cover today. There's going to be steps here so that all of your expectations can turn out to be something that's not only healthy, but has you be more understood and actually further where you're trying to go.
Exactly. And that's really even the first point. We want to debunk this idea. Sometimes I see like Instagram memes or different graphics go around, and one says, the key to a great relationship: have zero expectations of them.
In itself is an expectation, right? I want you to think about that. If you set out that we have no expectations, and then you come to find out your partner ends up having an expectation, you're going to be disappointed about that too. We're not supposed to have expectations. So in and of itself, having no expectations would be an expectation. So you really don't get around it. So that's why we're going to bring to you today, it's not about getting around these expectations. It's about what you do with them, because they actually can lead to growth.
Yeah, and that's the thing we want to debunk. You, as a human being, and you can even describe this even a little better than I can, because you understand so much about the brain. Like, he is obsessed with understanding how the brain works and just how human beings are built. But one of the things is, we are designed to sort in our mind. Right. Good, bad, right, wrong, I like, I dislike. And so we are always perceiving things, and a lot of it is driven by our upbringing. This is what I saw my parents do, or this is what I told is good, bad, right, wrong. It can happen from the faith that we grow up in. It can be from movies, or just even people who influenced us. And so then our brain creates this reality of, okay, this is how I know. Good, bad, right, wrong, like, dislike.
This is what a relationship should be like.
Exactly. And so your brain is designed to sort. Aaron, what else?
It's a prediction engine. Yes. And it's really there for you to ultimately survive. And so your brain comes up with scenarios. It comes up with these expectations so that you can plan out things that might happen in the future that would be harmful to you, so that you can plan to avoid them.
Yes.
That's really what your brain is doing most of the time. And then you're now filtering out situations and conversations with your own partner. Is this one of those expectations? Is this a scenario that I can get hurt? Is this something that's going to cause me pain so that I can avoid this? And that's really what your brain is ultimately doing most of the time.
Yeah. So it's helpful to help us survive from a car driving by. It can sometimes cause a little bit of tension in relationships. And it's funny too, because we all hear the phrase like, don't expect your partner to read your mind. Yet, if we're honest, how many of us truly operate like they should be able to?
Yeah.
And I know that when I talk to a lot of people and I'm like, they're all disappointed about something, or I feel like they didn't know what I needed was just a hug, and for them to tell me everything's going to be okay. One, yeah. Even something that came up for us.
Well, even how the partner looks. Oh, I shouldn't have to tell them that I want a compliment about how I look today.
Yes.
They should just know that. We've been married. That's something that is just a base requirement in a sense, right? You're just going to get yourself into a trap of expectation. And one of the things you should be taking away here is that expectations lead to disappointments. You're going to start to be disappointed in your partner. They didn't give me a compliment today. They didn't have any physical touch. I didn't get a hug or a smooch.
Yeah.
And so are these things wrong to have?
No.
No.
is just
no, having these
happening.
expectations are not wrong.
Yes.
Before we start to jump into more so of what you can do with these, I do also want to say, because I was contemplating on this, if you're someone that is pursuing any type of growth, which as a human being, that's basically the only thing that we're here to do, is to evolve and to change. So we come up with vision statements for couples often. So if you have any goals for what you want your life and your relationship to be like, you set forth on that path to have that outcome happen. That in itself is now going to be an expectation of what you're able to achieve. Maybe a family, kids, a house, a job, salary, friends, your health. All of these things are progress. And in a sense, that's where your expectations are always going to come from. If you're someone that's going towards growth, you're always going to have a certain set of expectations that you're going to pursue and achieve them.
Yeah.
So expectations are actually necessary. You have to have them. They're a part of the gap between your desire and where you are now.
Ooh, that's good.
And so that's why when I see posts that say, don't have any expectations, I'm like, well, you're probably not doing anything with your life. You would have to be sitting on the couch watching Netflix, but you would still have expectations of new releases and better movies to watch.
Dang it, Netflix, more movie. Totally.
So when it comes to your partner, you know, there's going to be expectations about how they show up, how they speak to you, how they support you along this path of pursuing this growth and pursuing this vision as a couple. So you're always going to have expectations, but they don't have to always be disappointments.
Yeah, they don't have to turn into ridiculous arguments, which then turn into the argument hangover, which, to share with you all, thank you so much. So many of you pre-ordered the book after last episode, which was called The Argument Hangover. Go listen to that one if you haven't yet. And so what we're helping you kind of prevent with not only this podcast, but with the book, is to prevent an extended argument hangover, which is that period of time that you're disconnected, you're hurt by them, you feel guilty for how you acted, and expectations can turn into a massive conflict and then a long argument hangover. So what we want to invite you to do is, of course, keep listening to this episode, but to go even deeper into this topic, go pre-order the book. And actually, we kind of, in a way, identified expectations we had around our book launch, right? Because our publisher tells us, hey guys, we actually want this to be one of the top 4 priority books for early 2021. And we're like, oh my God, they have an expectation now, right? We can identify it. And so let's all together champion this book being successful, not for us, but because of what it's going to do for other couples. You know that you have friends who could really use some additional skills in their relationship. And Aaron, do you want to share very briefly before we go on about the pre-order bonuses? Like, why shouldn't they wait?
Oh, yeah. Well, if you pre-order right now, you're going to get access to a mini course on the argument hangover, which is going to allow you to start to shift, because the book's not out yet. You can start to shift your perception of what conflicts are and start to leverage them into the growth and the benefit that they can be. Plus, when you do get into argument hangovers, because you are going to, you're going to have the steps to not only resolve, but come back together and reconnect. So there's a mini course available. There's a debriefing from conflict guide that you'll get access to, $200 worth of bonuses. So go and pre-order that book and make sure you get access to those.
Yeah, so it is theargumenthangover.com, pretty easy to remember. And on there will be all the retailers, and then you'll put your receipt number. That's how we know so many of you ordered after the last one, because we could see them coming in. And then you get a link to immediately get those bonuses. So theargumenthangover.com. Now, going back to the content here, we already identified that people will have expectations. The goal in your relationship is not to delete all expectations, have no expectations of your partner, or get upset that they have expectations of you. That's not the goal, right? So some people then ask us, okay, well, is this expectation I have healthy or realistic? Should I somehow remove this from my brain? Or I can't believe my partner expects this of me. Is that healthy of them to expect that? Here's the thing. Every relationship has different expectations. There isn't a cookie cutter version of guys, this is the perfect relationship.
Or
And
here are the acceptable, healthy expectations. Here's the list of unhealthy expectations, because it's not about that.
Yeah.
It's not about categorizing your expectations.
Yeah, and it's really standards. Like, I know there's certain expectations that we teach. Like, for example, in our coaching and our workshops, we would talk about like different emotional expectations. Hey, we find in our research that it isn't healthy to expect your partner to anticipate what you need, right? So we have different examples of them, but that would be probably a whole other episode. What we want you to capture is your relationship expectations are likely going to be different from your parents, from your friends, from what you see online, social media. We can compare that. And so you don't want to go, well, my partner has this expectation of me, but my parents didn't expect that of each other. So is that not healthy? It's what can you two agree to? What works for both of you? Quick example that I thought of just now. I know that in generations before me and my family, the expectations were around like roles, like the women cook and the women clean. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but that expectation doesn't work for me. Okay. And when we were getting into a committed relationship, one thing that we kind of fleshed out was that Aaron doesn't have an expectation that I cook dinner for him every night. Thank goodness, because I don't actually enjoy cooking. And so what I mean to say is that I know other people who do have that expectation, but it works for them. He or she expects the other person to cook great meals every single night, and it has to be something fresh. It can't be leftovers. And they like that expectation. It works for both of them.
Yeah. So there might be an audience member thinking like, oh, well, we have to come together and say what works for us. Well, the first part is it must be expressed.
Yes.
First and foremost, that is the answer to this entire podcast. The difference between healthy expectations and unhealthy expectations are the ones that are expressed versus the ones that are unexpressed. Healthy are expectations that you actually say out loud to your partner. Hey, I realize I actually have this expectation. Or like how we started, you said, I realize that there's an expectation maybe that you have of cooking dinner and doing the meals, so you brought it forward. I was able to say, well, you know what? I don't have that expectation. So that is the main difference. Write this down, underline it, rewind if you need to. It's that not even just in the beginning of the relationship.
Throughout.
As we said, if you're going to be growing, if you're going to be pursuing a certain lifestyle, or your relationship is going to be meant for something, you will always have new expectations come up.
Yeah.
Like even right now, we do this podcast, and one of us is the one looking at the outline. So I realized like I have an expectation that the person that has the outline, and I think we both do, like follow it exactly. So you're always going to come to new realizations of expectations.
Yeah.
So they're healthy when you say, hey partner, I realize I even have a new expectation. And so for a lot of you, the conversation might actually be, hey, I'm actually realizing expectations that I've had up until this point.
Yeah.
Expectations around the cooking, around
sex.
Yes. How about initiating sex?
Or finances. Or
finances,
parenting.
who does them, parenting. Yeah. So this is probably the thing for audience members now. Any place you've had an upset or you've been disappointed, you want to go back and say, okay, what was my expectation? And then say to your partner, hey, I realize I've had an expectation around this.
Well, and I love what you're saying about that, because that being the main takeaway, if you don't discuss them, you don't express them,
right,
and then your partner doesn't agree or counter offer to the expectation, they become a prison for you or for them. And I know that sounds strong, but think about this. Think about being your partner. And here you are with these expectations that you're not expressing because whatever reason, that'd be a whole other conversation about why you're not expressing them. Or maybe you're catching them way after the fact. If you are not letting your partner in on them, and then they're disappointing you and frustrating you, and so now you're not being this great person with them, you are basically putting them in an emotional expectation prison. You know, it's like, wow, I can't do anything right. And I feel like kind of controlled by your expectations.
Everything I try to do, you have some sort of rebuttal.
Exactly.
I didn't do it right. I didn't do it the way that you liked it. And that, like you said, can feel like a constrained, suppressed relationship, a prison.
Exactly.
And that is a place where you need to look at the expectations. Have they been expressed or have they gone unexpressed? And even more so, it's really about not just sharing your disappointment with your partner. This was the quote tile I thought of for this episode. Most people are going to be expressing their disappointment to their partner. You shouldn't have done this. I want you to have dinner made. You should have paid for this. You should have done the finances. You should have made a better decision about moving across the country.
That was something with us.
This will be the last episode that we ever mention our moving.
Maybe not ever.
I don't promise that. But that was an expectation you had, clearly. And this was a huge upset for us.
Yes.
This was never expressed because it never got to the point to even think of it.
Yes.
You know, I made a decision about the moving company without doing as much research. And that got us into the scenarios it got us into. So I just really want people to get in your relationship, you're going to come to realizations of new things.
Yes.
You were upset because of all these things happening, you were then upset and had an expectation that I researched things all the way through. So in that case, what was mostly happening, and check this out, audience, you start to share what you're disappointed about with your partner.
Yeah.
That's not sharing your expectation. That's sharing your disappointment.
It's like venting.
Or putting them down. It's exactly, you're just venting.
Oh, I'm so frustrated. You did this again or you didn't do that. Yeah, it's venting.
Complaining.
And then they're left with like, again, man, I can't do it.
anything
I can't do
right.
anything right, which is one of the kind of fundamental things we can start to feel in a relationship. And that then kind of drains love, drains intimacy, drains connection.
Well, I do want to say, you have to set up that time.
Yeah.
Your partner can be someone that you vent to, but you're going to have to tell them, hey, I like to set up a time. I like you to be the listener so I can just vent. I can clear this emotion out. But it can't be this sort of drive-by, you just share your disappointments. But then also, then you might think, well, how do I have this conversation when I do feel disappointed or I have an expectation? Well, you'll want to take your partner and say, once again, hey, I realize this has been a challenging season or I've been frequently upset about this. And I realize I have this expectation. So once again, we're coming back to, as soon as you start to communicate your expectation versus sharing your disappointment or not saying anything at all, it becomes in the healthy category.
And I think it's important to mention because some people listening to this who aren't listening with your partner, which, by the way, feel free to send this to them if they haven't. Say, hey, love, it means so much if you would listen to this. Or maybe you're listening together, taking notes. I love
those,
that.
by the way,
Yes, love that. I think it's important to address that saying, hey, let's talk about expectations does not mean you're now creating commands. It doesn't mean you're now dictating to each other. This is my expectation, therefore you must agree to it. And there may be certain things that, you know, an agreement either doesn't come right away or like a win-win agreement because it has to be win-win. It cannot be you have to sacrifice who you are and what's important to you to meet my expectation. That isn't healthy for sure. So if there's either not an agreement that immediately reveals itself, because maybe you need to flesh it out, you need to see what works for both of you, or it may get to a point where there's not something that you'll ever agree on. Like personality characteristics can be one. And you were going to mention about like the communication. Do you want to share briefly the kind of personality expectation you had around us?
Yeah, wow, great point. Thanks for leading us here. You know, there's a big difference when you share an expectation that is like a personality characteristic or a trait of a partner, and you have an expectation that they change it or they be a different person. That's a lot different than sharing an expectation around an action or a behavior. So if you can get to the place where you're sharing expectations around behaviors or actions, I think this is even a Chris Voss thing, right? Where you label the action or the behavior rather than the person. Because if I was to share an expectation with you, which here's the example actually, there were times where I'd be disappointed in a sense of how you communicated with me, right? It'd be tone,
like
it would be speed,
yeah.
it would be kind of maybe either from another room or like in passing. And for me, would feel like you were commanding me to do something. So when I would get a little bit upset or triggered and then try to get you to change it, right? And tell you, hey, that's not
Can you agree
the
to
principle.
this, and this?
Yeah. Can you do it like this? Can you ask a question? And that would have you feel
Constrained.
right. That was like the prison. You would say that back to me, which in the moment it wasn't as helpful for us to resolve it. You know, it wasn't really the space that had us look at expectations. We were sharing more disappointments. You're like, well, I'm not going to like change myself. I'm not going to, this is how I communicate.
Yeah.
So in the moment, it's like, this is how I communicate, get over it and deal with it. And that's how it goes for lots of couples.
Right.
So this, I think, is the point you were getting to. I did share my expectation around tone and speed and like it not sounding like a command. It's more of an invitation. And that felt kind of constrained to you. But for me, I expressed the expectation. So from a personal level, I've shared the expectation in a sense that gives me some freedom around it. It empowers me. I think that was the word that you came up with.
Well, because then it's not a blind spot. If you don't identify that you have an expectation, even if it is a personality thing that maybe they're never going to change, like they're not going to agree to be a different person, for example. Of course, maybe there's certain things that could transform self-development. I mean, we aren't the same people we were years ago, but things that are maybe at this moment who they are, they're not going to be like, yeah, I agree to completely change who I am.
Yeah.
So what is empowering, as you said, is for the person that has the expectation to identify it's an expectation. Otherwise, it'll keep existing like you're disappointing me, you're frustrating me, and it'll just create this tension and resistance. So when you and I have these moments of, okay, wow, I just totally identified, I had this expectation, me vocalizing it doesn't mean now you're going to be like, okay, I completely agree to meeting that. It's just bonding, and I think creates some space and a little bit more freedom and lightness when it's like, oh, now I understand where that kind of frustration came from.
And there might be an opportunity there to explore what kind of agreement could be made around that.
Yeah.
And I think that was something you ushered us into. Hey, that's not going to be like that all the time. You might say something like, you know, I'll try a few of those things out. But there might be a certain agreement that you now come to around that to make it a little bit better in a sense. But I do want to invite the partners into then have that be your own personal work.
Yeah.
Because the last thing is then, I mean, all of life is a series of thoughts. Those thoughts, when are most dominant, turn into emotions. When that happens a lot, that becomes our patterns and our behaviors and then our beliefs. So it really does come down to you that if you're continually frustrated about something, you have shared and expressed this as an expectation. You know, you've come to the agreements, but it doesn't like meet all of your requirements. This might just be your personal work because you're having a thought about something and then you're making it mean something.
Yeah.
And that meaning is driving emotion. That meaning is becoming a belief system. And so that's just maybe a place for you to now continually look like, oh, when Jocelyn speaks to me in that tone, oh, I think she's telling me what to do. But we brought that up and you said, I'm not trying to dictate you. That's just how you communicate. Okay,
Yeah.
so my work is going to be when I hear that and when I get triggered, I've already expressed it. We've come to the agreements that we have come to. Now, okay, let me go into my own thoughts. This is my own work to say, you know what, Jocelyn's not commanding me.
Yeah.
This is just how she's communicating. She's really passionate about this area. You know,
Yeah, and
make it mean something different.
And I think you say all that kind of like it's like, oh, it's just your personal work and it's just easy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some people right then were like, well, how do I distinguish between what we need to talk about and how do I even bring this up? But then also, how do I know which ones we're not going to come to a win-win agreement about, and I need to do some self-work. And so I think it's important that we give them a tool for that, because we can only cover so much on these podcast episodes, because also we can't give you visuals and we can't act it out and model it for you.
True.
And that's actually why we want to invite those of you who haven't taken the Couples Workshop Home Edition one. to do that. We know like hundreds of you have. I mean, it's a great way for you to have at your own pace, on your own time, because it's actually something you can do when it works for you. You have a workshop that, here's what's cool about it. We're in a studio and we're modeling it for you. So a lot of times people are wondering, well, how would I bring this up? How would it go? What are the steps? Because if I do this step before this step, it may turn into a disagreement or... So we actually model this for you, and we give you a step-by-step process for how to identify the frustrations, expectations, and go through it. And there's a visual that we can't physically show you on this podcast.
Yeah.
So we want to encourage you to go to thecouplesworkshop.com. It is an investment, but a really, really reasonable one.
Small investment to be able to disappear the disappointments in your relationship.
Couples have said they would have paid 10 times the amount, and that in the 5.5 hours of content, it produced more results than months of counseling or just trying to figure it out on your own.
Yeah, because it's partially facilitated by us.
Right.
If you try to go out, even from this podcast, you might find that your current patterns and behaviors and then the thought processes of your partner and the residual emotion that's been there causes triggers. But if you take the workshop, you're creating a space and we're going through the exercise with you. So you have this container that's somewhat facilitated by us to guide both of you to have these conversations without getting triggered and having it go down the path of, frustration and conflict, which it might right now. And we acknowledge that it probably is going that way. So even more so, the workshop is so needed because there's really no other place that you can feel like calm around being able to share frustrations like that.
So true. Absolutely. So go to thecouplesworkshop.com and grab that. Do it at your own pace. Now that we have said that, I think the last piece we wanted to cover was kind of in a way how to vocalize the expectation in a way that won't feel like a command. And what we offered was to identify what it means to you. So for example, let's say you have an expectation around the dishes. Rather than just like saying to your partner, well, I have an expectation that you do the dishes because I cooked. It will help your partner emotionally understand it rather than feeling like they're being dictated to. If you, for example, start it with something like this. Hey, I realize that I have an expectation around having more shared responsibility and that we're really helping each other with things around the house. So now there's more of the emotional desire. What that would look like for me is if you would do the dishes since I cook. And another example would be around like sex. So that's a big one that comes up for couples when we talk to them is, I have this expectation that you're the one that initiates. You're quote unquote the man, you should be the one initiating. Well, if you kind of tell your partner is what my emotional desire is feeling desired. It's feeling like you're attracted to me and drawn to me. Then they'll emotionally understand you more when then you say what that'd look like.
Well, it's a positive thing.
Yes.
Right? It's a positive intention you have for the relationship. I like to feel more desired. I'd like for more passion to be available and alive and experience in our relationship. The partner would be like, okay, great, I'm in for that. You're like, all right, I noticed I had the expectation around the amount that we initiate. Oh, okay. So once again, now you're releasing the conversation together and you can set up what your agreements might be.
Yeah.
And that's another podcast. Could be about frequency. It could be about days. We won't go into that. But now you're in the conversation as a team because you've shared what your positive intent is, and then you're able to share the expectation that you saw, but you're not stopping there. You're now saying, what can we do about that?
Yeah, and last thing I want to say on this, because I know we've covered quite a bit here, I think you could listen back to this episode a couple times, is the reason we ended on that piece about identifying what it means to you is because so often we miss out on sharing that emotional piece with our partner. And we see it all the time in our sessions is kind of staying at the logical level with each other. Here's what I'd like you to do. Here's the detail. Here's my to-do list. And
okay, I had one thing to that.
Yeah,
the logical piece, but then what people do then is when they've held it in, then they share the disappointment.
Yes.
They share the frustration.
Totally.
They share the emotion just to get it out. So that would
I'm
be another
so
place.
upset.
Yeah, exactly. But there's this third way that we're talking about.
Which is saying, here's what it means to me. Here's the emotion that I'm reaching for, or that I'd like us both to, what I'd like us both to feel in the relationship. And we as human beings are relational. We are emotional. And that's where empathy comes in. Your partner is likely to empathize with you more if they know the feeling that you're reaching for both of you.
Yeah.
So we covered a lot here. I think definitely go back and listen. Just to do a quick recap, we talked about how expectations are going to happen in relationships. You are designed to have a prediction engine brain and to sort. And so that's the goal, is to then express them. Right. It's not to delete expectations. It's to express them and then be able to see if there's a win-win agreement between both of you. Mm-hmm. And then it's also important to know that it's not always the goal that you have to agree to something. It's that it's powerful to even vocalize it so that you are empowered, knowing that if you're ever disappointed, it's because you have an expectation. And it's not to now have your partner just become a yes sir, yes ma'am, I will do what you want type of person.
Yeah, it puts it over on you where you can do something about it, rather than your partner not complying with something that's going to, what you would say, have me feel better.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't put your own experience out anywhere else except for within yourself. I mean, and that's one of the base spiritual principles, is that mostly we operate like everyone else should be here so that we feel good.
Yes.
But that puts then your experience externally, rather than your experience is always happening internally.
Yeah.
So Wayne Dyer, let me just quote Wayne Dyer because I was listening to him yesterday. He talks about, if you dropped your keys in your house in the dark and you were searching around for them, but you're like, oh, I can't find them because it's too dark in here. Then you looked outside because it's nighttime and there was a street light on. You said, oh, that light is on over there. Let me go look for my keys out there. So now you are outside searching for your keys in the light. Well, that might seem stupid. Like, that's not where you dropped your keys, but that's primarily what you're doing. You're searching outside rather than you're staying inside of yourself. And that's what this is able to do. If you share or notice, I have an expectation, then you're taking and empowering yourself for your own experience.
Yes.
Not putting it outside on a circumstance or on how your partner shows up. And once again, it's a conversation. We're not saying like your partner doesn't change or they continue to do things that frustrate you. Obviously, we're talking about the context where you're expressing them. Mm-hmm. But once again, your experience is within yourself and not outside.
Powerful.
In that street light where you didn't drop your keys.
Powerful. Always coming in with the mic drop, moments there. And again, we don't want you to be left with this episode because we know we opened up a world. Like this is an important, deep, and can somewhat be an uncomfortable conversation, especially if it's new for you. And that's why we have 2 more resources for you. So go pre-order the book, The Argument Hangover, and then also get the couples workshop. Both of those together, especially with that course that you get for pre-ordering the book, like you will be set up. So go to The Argument Hangover and then the couples workshop, and then you will have ways to just go deeper into this. Seriously, like you cannot not do both of those. Yeah. With that said, everyone, we always love connecting with you, and we will talk to you on the next episode.